The wind carved through the valley like a blade, carrying snow that stung worse than needles. Marcus Reed pulled his makeshift coat tighter and pressed forward through the drifts. His breath came out in white clouds that froze before they could dissipate. The abandoned research station behind him was running low on fuel, and he needed to find more wood before nightfall or risk freezing in his sleep. He had been alone for 3 months now, 3 months since the last radio signal went. Silent. 3 months since he had seen another human face. The ice age that followed the attacks had claimed most of what remained of civilization, leaving only scattered pockets of survivors like himself, clinging to life in a world that no longer welcomed them. Marcus stopped at the edge of a steep ravine, scanning the rocky outcroppings below for anything useful. That was when he heard it. A sound that did not belong to wind or settling ice. It was weak, barely audible, but unmistakably organic. Something was breathing down there. He secured his pack and began the careful descent, using exposed roots and jutting stones as handholds. The sound grew clearer as he approached a narrow cave opening carved into the ravine wall. Not human breathing, something different. The rhythm was wrong, too slow, too deep. Marcus drew his knife and approached the cave mouth with caution. The darkness inside was complete, but the breathing continued from somewhere within. He fumbled for his flashlight, knowing the batteries were nearly dead but having no choice. The pale beam cut through the shadows and revealed something that made him freeze. 2 figures huddled against the far wall of the cave. The larger one was clearly adult, wrapped in what remained of a shimmering garment that seemed to shift colors even in the dim light. The smaller figure, obviously a child, lay still against the adult's chest. Both had skin that held a faint luminescence, almost silver in the flashlight beam. The adult's eyes opened as the light hit them. They were large, multifaceted like a insect's, but held an unmistakable intelligence and fear. The being tried to pull the child closer, a protective gesture that transcended species. Marcus lowered his knife, but kept it ready. He had never seen anything like them, but their distress was universal. The adult was shivering violently, despite the strange shimmer of their skin. The child appeared unconscious, breathing so shallowly that Marcus wondered if they were dying. He made a decision that went against every survival instinct he had learned. These beings were not human, might not even be from Earth, but they were suffering. And Marcus Reed had been a medic before the world ended. Some reflexes never died. Moving slowly, he removed his pack and pulled out a thermal blanket. He held it up so they could see it, then placed it on the ground between them and stepped back. The adult watched him with those strange eyes, clearly trying to understand his intentions. Marcus pointed to himself. "Marcus," he said clearly. Then he gestured to the blanket and made wrapping motions, universal language of warmth and shelter. The adult hesitated, then reached for the blanket with trembling hands. Their fingers were longer than human fingers, ending in what looked like small claws, but they handled the material with desperate gentleness. They wrapped it around the child, and Marcus saw some of the tension leave their posture. The child stirred slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the same multifaceted eyes, though smaller and somehow brighter. The adult made a sound, a low thrumming that might have been words in whatever language they spoke. It sounded like gratitude. Marcus pulled out his water bottle and held it up. Both beings tracked the movement with obvious hunger. He unscrewed the cap and took a small sip to show it was safe, then offered it forward. The adult reached for it carefully, their movements weak but deliberate. They lifted the bottle to the child's lips first. The small being managed a few sips before the adult took some for themselves. Marcus could see how much that simple act cost them, the way their hands shook with exhaustion. He made another decision. The cave was a death trap. The wind funneled directly through it, and the temperature would drop even further after sunset. These beings would not survive the night here, and something deep in his chest refused to let that happen. Marcus stood and gestured toward the cave mouth, then pointed in the direction of his shelter. He made walking motions, then pointed too. All 3 of them. The message was clear. "Come with me." The adult's eyes narrowed with suspicion and calculation. They were weighing risks, trying to decide if the human was more dangerous than the cold. Marcus understood, would have made the same assessment. To show his intent, Marcus began repacking his supplies, but left out a packet of dried meat. He opened it and placed it where they could reach, then stepped back again. Food was precious, and giving it away was a clear signal of non-hostile intentions. The adults stared at the food, then at Marcus, then back at the child in their arms. The small being was growing paler, the natural luminescence of their skin fading. Time was running out for all of them, and finally, the adult began struggling to stand. Marcus moved forward instinctively to help, but they flinched away from his approach. He stopped and waited. He managed to get to their feet, swaying with the effort the child held protectively against their chest. They looked at Marcus and made that thrumming sound again. Then they took one careful step toward the cave mouth. It was acceptance. Trust given reluctantly, but given nonetheless. Marcus led them out into the dying light of the winter afternoon. The journey to his shelter would be difficult, especially carrying a child, but he had made his choice. Whatever. These beings were, wherever they had come from, they would not die alone in a frozen cave. Not while Marcus Reed still drew breath. The wind howled around them as they began the climb out of the ravine, 3 unlikely survivors bound together by necessity and the simple recognition that life, in any form, was worth preserving. The shelter Marcus had built was nothing impressive. Just reinforced walls carved into a natural depression, covered with salvaged metal sheeting and insulated with everything he could find. But it was warm, and right now, warmth meant survival. He pushed open the heavy door and gestured for his unexpected guest to enter. The adult alien, whom he had started thinking of as the mother, hesitated at the threshold. Their large eyes scanned the interior, taking in every detail, every potential threat or escape route. Marcus understood their caution. He would have done the same. The space was cramped, but functional. A small wood-burning stove occupied one corner, its metal chimney snaking up through a carefully sealed hole in the roof. Shelves lined the walls, holding canned goods, medical supplies, and tools. A single cot sat against the far wall, covered with layers of blankets and furs Marcus had scavenged from abandoned homes. The mother finally stepped inside, moving with careful deliberation. The child in their arms had grown even paler during the journey, their natural luminescence now, just a faint glow beneath translucent skin. Marcus could see they were in critical condition. He moved to the stove and began feeding it more wood, coaxing the flames higher. Quickly, and he watched the mother's posture relax slightly as warmth reached them. They made that thrumming sound again, softer this time, almost like a sigh of relief. Marcus pointed to the cot and made settling motions. The mother understood and carefully lowered themselves onto the edge, still clutching the child protectively. He could see now that their shimmering garment was badly torn, revealing wounds along their side that looked infected. The fabric itself seemed to be some kind of living material, its edges trying to seal themselves, but failing due to damage and exhaustion. Moving slowly to avoid startling them, Marcus retrieved his medical kit from the shelves. It was not much. Just basic supplies he had managed to gather, but it was better than nothing. He opened the kit and showed them each item, letting them see that he meant no harm. The mother watched with those multifaceted eyes as Marcus cleaned his hands with alcohol. They seemed to recognize the medical preparations, which told him something important. These beings understood healing, probably had their own medical knowledge. They were not primitive, despite their current desperate state. Marcus pointed to their wounds and made gentle questioning sounds. The mother looked down at their injured side, then back at him. After a long moment, they carefully shifted the child to one arm and pulled back the damaged fabric, revealing the full extent of their injuries. The wounds were unlike anything Marcus had seen before. They appeared to be energy burns, precise and deep, as if made by some kind of advanced weapon. The edges had a strange crystalline quality, and the surrounding tissue showed signs of systematic breakdown. Whatever had attacked them possessed technology far beyond human understanding. As Marcus began cleaning the wounds with gentle antiseptic, something unexpected happened. The child in the mother's arms stirred and opened their eyes. Those same multifaceted orbs, but brighter, more vibrant than the adults. The small being looked directly at Marcus, and suddenly, images flashed through his mind. He saw a beautiful world with crystalline cities that caught and refracted light into rainbow patterns. He saw beings like his patients moving through graceful spires that seemed to grow from the living rock itself. He saw children playing in gardens where the plants themselves glowed with soft bioluminescence. Then the images turned dark. Massive ships appeared in the sky, angular and wrong like geometric nightmares. They began tearing the crystal cities apart with beams of pure destruction. The beings fled in terror as their world burned around them. Marcus saw the mother grabbing the child and running toward small escape vessels as their civilization crumbled. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Marcus gasping. The child was still staring at him, and he realized what had happened. Somehow, the small being had shared their memories with him. They had shown him their story without words, in a way that transcended language barriers. The mother noticed Marcus's reaction and looked between him and the child with surprise. They spoke in their thrumming language to the small one, who responded with higher-pitched tones that sounded almost musical. It was clearly a conversation, and Marcus was the subject. After a moment, the mother looked back at Marcus with something new in their expression. Recognition, understanding. They had realized their child had communicated with him. It changed everything. They were no longer complete strangers. Marcus continued tending to the mother's wounds, but now there was less tension in the air. The child, whom he started thinking of as a daughter based on their interactions, continued to watch him with bright curiosity. Occasionally, small images would flicker through his mind. Simple things now, feeling of warmth, gratitude, safety. As he worked, Marcus began talking softly, knowing they could not understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. He told them about finding them in the cave, about his decision to help, about his hope that they would recover. The mother listened intently, as if trying to parse meaning from his voice. When he finished treating the wounds, Marcus prepared a simple meal from his supplies. Heated broth, some preserved vegetables, and strips of protein bar dissolved in warm water to make it easier to digest. He served it in small portions, unsure what these beings could safely consume. The mother accepted the food cautiously, testing it with small tastes before feeding some to the child. Both beings seemed to find it acceptable, even beneficial. As they ate, Marcus could see color returning to their skin, the natural luminescence growing stronger. The child finished eating, first and settled back in their mother's arms, but their bright eyes remained fixed on Marcus. More images came, clearer now, a feeling of safety, sense that this strange human could be trusted. And something else, something that made Marcus's breath catch. Hope. Despite everything they had lost, despite being stranded on an alien world, with only a lone human for company, the child still held hope for the future. The mother seemed to sense the communication between Marcus and their child. They reached out slowly, carefully, and touched Marcus's hand with their longer fingers. The contact was brief, but it carried weight. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, and the beginning of something that might become trust. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and snow piled higher against the walls of the shelter. But inside, three beings from different worlds shared warmth, and began to forge an unlikely bond that would change everything for all of them. 3 days had passed since Marcus brought his unusual guests to the shelter. The mother, who had begun making soft sounds that Marcus interpreted as her name, seemed to be something like Zephora in human speech. The child responded to gentle calls that sounded like nicks when Marcus tried to pronounce them. Small steps toward understanding, but meaningful ones. Zephyra's wounds were healing with remarkable speed. The crystalline edges had begun to fade, and new tissue grew in patterns Marcus had never seen before. Their biology was clearly more advanced than human physiology, with natural regenerative abilities that fascinated his medical mind. More importantly, the faster healing meant they were growing stronger each day. Nyx had recovered even more dramatically. The small being was now alert and active, though they stayed close to their mother's side. Their telepathic communications with Marcus had become more frequent and detailed. Simple concepts at first, then complex images, and now entire sequences of memory that painted vivid pictures of their lost world. On this particular morning, Marcus was checking their supplies. Child's large eyes were brighter than normal, almost glowing with intensity. Images flooded Marcus's mind, but these were different from the peaceful memories of their homeworld or the terrifying scenes of its destruction. He saw vast machines, geometric and cold, moving through space like a plague of metal locusts. They consumed everything in their path, stripping worlds bare of resources and life before moving on to the next target. The beings that controlled these machines were not visible in the visions, but their presence was felt as a crushing weight of pure malevolence. Marcus staggered under the force of the images. These were not just memories, but warnings. Nyx was trying to tell him something urgent about the enemies who had destroyed their world. The child pointed toward the shelter's small window, then shared another vision. The same geometric ships, but closer now, searching. Zephyra noticed the exchange and moved quickly to their child's side. They spoke in their thrumming language, rapid and concerned. Nyx responded with higher tones, clearly explaining what they had shared with Marcus. Zephyra's expression changed to one of alarm, and they turned to Marcus with desperate urgency. The mother began making gestures, pointing to the sky, then to Marcus, then to themselves. They were trying to communicate something critical about their common situation. Marcus wished desperately that he could understand their language, but the meaning was becoming clear through context and Nyx's supplementary images. The attackers were still out there, still hunting, and both humans and Zephyra's people were their targets. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold outside. He moved to his communication equipment, ancient radio gear, had been using to try to contact other human survivors. For weeks, he had heard only static, but now he wondered if that silence meant something more sinister. He turned on the radio and began scanning frequencies, listening carefully to the empty spaces between static bursts. Zephyra and Nyx watched intently as he worked, recognizing the technology even if they did not understand its specific function. After an hour of searching, Marcus found something. Faint, nearly lost in the background noise, but definitely artificial. A repeating signal that sounded almost like the geometric patterns Nyx had shown him in their visions. His blood ran cold as he realized what it might mean. The enemy machines were not gone. They were still here, still active, still hunting any survivors they could find. He looked at his companions and saw understanding in their expressions. They had recognized the signal too. Zephyra spoke softly to Nyx, who nodded and then turned. To Marcus, new images flowed between them, more detailed than any before. Marcus saw the machines, the child called Devourers, in his mind. He learned their purpose. They were not just weapons of war, but harvesters, designed to strip worlds of all useful resources, including the knowledge and genetic material of intelligent species. They left nothing behind but empty shells, then moved on to find new targets. Earth had been attacked 6 months ago. Most major population centers were gone in the first wave. The ice age that followed was artificial, created by the machines, to force survivors into the open where they could be easily found and eliminated. The few humans who remained were living on borrowed time. Zephyra's world had been attacked 2 years earlier. They and Nyx were among the few refugees who had escaped in the chaos. They had been fleeing from system to system trying to find somewhere safe. When their ship was damaged and crashed on Earth, they thought they were alone until Marcus found them. But Nyx's abilities were growing stronger, and the child could sense things others could not. The Devourers had left survey machines on Earth, dormant but waiting. As more survivors died or were captured, these machines would activate and call the main fleet back to finish harvesting the planet. Marcus absorbed this information with growing dread and determination. 2 species, both nearly extinct, both hunted by the same remorseless enemy. It should have been hopeless. But as he looked at Zephyra's fierce protectiveness and Nyx's bright courage, he felt something he had not experienced in months. Purpose. Not just survival anymore, but a reason to fight back. He moved to a locked chest in the corner of the shelter and began entering a complex combination. Inside were items he had hoped never to use again. Maps marked with the locations of abandoned military installations. Access codes for facilities that might still be operational. Contact protocols for other survivors who might have similar resources. Before the attacks, Marcus had not just been a medic. He had been part of a classified research program studying theoretical defense systems against unknown threats. Program had been considered paranoid speculation by most. Now it might be their only hope. He spread the maps on his small table and began pointing to marked locations, then looked at his companions. Zephyro examined the symbols with sharp intelligence, clearly understanding they represented some kind of strategic information. Nyx leaned closer and shared images of understanding, showing Marcus that they grasped the concept of hidden resources and coordinated resistance. Outside, the wind continued its endless howl, but inside the shelter, something new was taking shape. 3 survivors from 2 different worlds were beginning to plan, not just for their survival, but for their revenge. The Devourers had made one crucial mistake in their calculations. They had left witnesses alive, and those witnesses were about to become far more dangerous than any machine intelligence could predict. Marcus looked at his unlikely allies and made a decision that would change the fate of both their species. They were not just going to hide and hope to survive, were going to fight back. And they were going to make sure the galaxy knew that. Earth and the Cathara homeworld would be avenged. The real war was just beginning. Part 4. The rising storm, the journey to the buried facility, took them 2 days through treacherous mountain terrain. Marcus led the way, following coordinates he had memorized years ago during his classified training. Zephyra moved with surprising grace despite their recent injuries, while Nyx rode on their mother's back, bright eyes constantly scanning the horizon for threats that only they could sense. The facility entrance was exactly where Marcus remembered it, hidden beneath a rock slide. That looked natural but had been carefully engineered. He activated the emergency access codes, hoping the system still functioned after months of abandonment. Ancient machinery groaned to life, and massive stone blocks shifted aside to reveal a metal doorway marked with symbols that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who knew their significance. Project Sentinel, humanity's last desperate attempt to prepare for threats from beyond Earth. The corridor beyond was dark and cold, but emergency lighting flickered on as they descended. Zephyra made soft, thrumming sounds of amazement at the human engineering, while Nyx shared images of wonder through their telepathic link. The child had never seen human technology on this scale, and their curiosity was infectious. Marcus led them deeper into the complex, past laboratories filled with equipment he'd barely understood and storage areas packed with supplies that had been stockpiled for emergencies exactly like this one. But their destination was the Central Command Center, where the facility's true purpose waited. The massive chamber opened before them like a cathedral of technology. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens dark but ready. In the center stood something that made even Marcus's pause in awe, a weapons system unlike anything ever built by human hands. Designed using theoretical principles that had seemed like science fiction just years ago, the resonance cannon, a device capable of disrupting the quantum coherence that held advanced machinery together. It had never been tested on a large scale, but simulations suggested it could disable entire fleets of automated ships if properly deployed. Zephyr approached the weapon with reverence, their hands tracing the elegant curves of its focusing array. They spoke in their thrumming language, and Nyx translated through shared images. Their people had theorized about similar technology, but had never had time to build it before the Devourers arrived. The combination of human engineering and Cathara theoretical knowledge could make this device far more powerful than its designers had ever imagined. Marcus began the startup sequence, his fingers flying over controls he had hoped never to use. One by one, the facility's systems came online. Power flowed through circuits that had waited patiently in the dark. Screens lit up with diagnostic information and status reports. Most importantly, the quantum resonance chamber began its slow charge cycle, but as the facility awakened, so did something else. Nyx suddenly stiffened, their large eyes going wide with alarm. Images flooded Marcus's mind, sharp and urgent. The dormant Devourer survey machines scattered across Earth were responding to the facility's energy signature. They were waking up, and they were calling for reinforcements. The timeline had just collapsed from weeks to hours. Zephyra recognized their child's distress and moved to comfort them. But Nyx pushed away gently and ran to one of the computer terminals. They placed their small hands on the interface, and suddenly the screens filled with information that should have been impossible for them to access. The child's developing psychic abilities were interacting with the facility's systems in ways no one had anticipated. Maps appeared showing the locations of active Devourer machines across the continent. Communication networks that had been silent for months suddenly crackled with signals from other human survivors. Most shocking of all, they detected incoming ships at the edge of the solar system. The main Devourer fleet was returning to finish what they had started. Marcus stared at the tactical display with a mixture of fear and determination. They had perhaps 6 hours before the first wave arrived. The resonance cannon needed at least 4 hours to reach full charge. That left 2 hours to gather every survivor they could find and prepare for a battle that would determine the fate of 2 species. He activated the facility's long-range communications array and began broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. His message was simple and urgent. Coordinates to the facility, instructions to bring weapons and supplies, promised that humanity finally had a way to fight back. The responses came faster than he had dared hope. The scattered voices from across the continent, survivors who had been hiding in bunkers in abandoned cities, military personnel who had maintained discipline even after their command structure collapsed. They were coming. It's not many, but enough to make a stand. Zephyra had been studying the weapon systems while Marcus coordinated the human response. They turned to him and began making complex gestures, accompanied by their thrumming speech. Nyx translated through shared images that made Marcus's heart race with possibility. The Cathara had not just theoretical knowledge of resonance weapons. Zephyra remembered the location of refugee ships hidden in asteroid fields throughout the solar system. Other survivors of their species, waiting in desperation for some sign of hope. If they could be contacted and convinced to join the fight, their advanced technology could tip the balance. Working together, Marcus and Zephyra modified the communications array to broadcast on frequencies the Cathara would recognize. Spoke into the transmitter, their voice carrying across the void to reach others of their kind. They spoke of alliance with humans, of a weapon that could hurt the Devourers, of hope where none had existed before. The response was immediate. Ship after ship reported their position and began moving toward Earth. Not the massive vessels of their lost civilization, but small, fast craft crewed by determined survivors who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Nyx suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm, sharing urgent new images. The child's expanding abilities had detected something else approaching Earth. Not Devourer ships this time, but other species. Other survivors from worlds the machines had attacked. Word was spreading across the galaxy that someone was finally fighting back. The facility became a hub of desperate activity as the first human survivors began arriving. Soldiers and civilians, scientists and engineers, anyone who could hold a weapon or work a control panel. They looked at Zephyra and Nyx with wonder and acceptance, understanding instinctively that survival meant cooperation between species. As the resonance cannon continued its charge cycle, Marcus found himself standing at the center of something he had never imagined. Not just a last stand against extinction, but the birth of an alliance that could reshape the galaxy. Humans working alongside Cathara, refugees, other alien survivors adding their knowledge and skills to the growing resistance. The Devourers had created this moment through their own cruelty. In trying to exterminate every trace of intelligent life, they had instead forged the very alliance that might finally stop them. Outside the facility, ships began landing in the snow. Human vessels jury-rigged for war, sleek Cathara craft glowing. With their own inner light and stranger ships belonging to species Marcus could not even identify. All united by loss, driven by hope, and ready to prove that life could triumph over the cold mathematics of extinction. The storm was rising, and at its heart stood three unlikely friends who had found each other in a frozen cave and discovered that hope, once kindled, could spread like wildfire across the stars. The first Devourer ships appeared as dark shapes against the star-filled sky. Their geometric forms rung against the natural curves of space. From the facility's observation deck, Marcus watched the enemy fleet take position in high orbit. Their movements precise and mechanical. There were more of them than the projections had shown, enough to scour every inch of Earth's surface if they chose. But they would not get that chance. Around the hidden facility, the assembled fleet of survivors took their positions. Human fighters that had been cobbled together from civilian aircraft and military salvage flew alongside sleek Cathara vessels that moved like living things through the atmosphere. Ships from a dozen other species completed the formation, each one representing worlds that had fallen to the Devourers, each crew carrying the weight of entire civilizations lost. In the command center, the resonance cannon hummed with barely contained power. 4 hours of charging had brought it to 90% capacity. Not quite the full strength they had hoped for, but enough to strike a devastating blow if aimed correctly. Zephyra stood at the targeting controls, their longer fingers dancing over interfaces that had been designed for human hands, but which they operated with intuitive grace. Nick sat in the center of the room, eyes closed in deep concentration, there, developing psychic abilities stretched to their limit as they coordinated the thoughts and intentions of thousands of beings scattered across the battle zone. The child had become something unprecedented. A living communication network that allowed species who had never met to work as one unified force. Marcus moved between the weapon controls and the tactical displays. His medical training transformed into battlefield coordination. He had never imagined himself as a military commander, but circumstances had made him the voice that united human and alien survivors alike. Through the comm systems, he could hear pilots from dozens of species confirming their readiness in languages he did not understand but whose determination transcended words. The Devourer fleet began its descent. Massive harvester ships surrounded by clouds of smaller attack craft. Their approach was methodical, designed to overwhelm any resistance through sheer numbers and firepower. They had done this countless times before, stripping worlds bare with mechanical efficiency. This time would be different. Marcus activated the facility's main communications array and broadcast on all frequencies. Knowing the Devourers would intercept his words. "This is Earth," he said, his voice carrying across space to every ship in the system. "This is where your conquest ends. This is where the galaxy fights back." The response was immediate. Devourer attack ships broke formation and dove toward the planet's surface, their weapons charging with cold light. But they met something they had not encountered before. Ships that moved with purpose rather than panic. Crews that fought with coordination, born of shared loss and unified hope. The first wave of battle erupted in the upper atmosphere as human fighters engaged Devourer scouts. The humans were outgunned and outnumbered, but they fought with desperate courage while Cathara ships provided support with weapons that bent light itself into devastating beams. Other alien vessels added their own unique technologies to the fight, creating a symphony of destruction that lit up the sky. In the command center, Nick suddenly opened their eyes and shared an urgent vision with Marcus. The child had sensed something critical about the Devourer fleet structure. The massive harvester ships were not just weapons, but mobile factories, capable of building new attack craft from the resources of defeated worlds. If they were allowed to land and begin harvesting, the battle would become unwinnable within hours. Marcus understood immediately. They had to strike at the harvesters while they were still in orbit, before they could establish ground-based manufacturing facilities. But that meant exposing the resonance cannon to counterattack. Firing while enemy ships were still functional and able to target the facility, he looked at Zephyra, who had been monitoring the weapon's charge status. The alien's multifaceted eyes met his with perfect understanding. They could fire now at 90% power, or wait another hour for full charge while the enemy gained strategic advantage. It was not really a choice at all. Zephyr's hands moved across the targeting controls with fluid precision, locking on to the largest harvester ship at the center of the enemy formation. The resonance cannon began its final targeting sequence, quantum energies building to levels that made the air itself vibrate with potential. Nyx stood and walked to the center of the room, placing one small hand on Marcus's arm and the other on their mother's shoulder. Through their psychic link, the child shared their intentions with every allied ship in the system. When the cannon fired, every pilot would know exactly what to do. The moment of truth arrived with a sound like reality tearing the resonance. Cannon discharged its accumulated energy in a beam of pure quantum disruption that tore through space and struck the harvester ship at its core. For an instant, nothing seemed to happen. Then the massive vessel began to come apart at the molecular level, its advanced systems failing as quantum coherence collapsed throughout its structure. The destruction of the harvester triggered a cascade. Failure through the Devourer fleet. Ships that had been coordinating their attacks suddenly found their communication networks disrupted. Attack craft that had been operating with mechanical precision began to drift aimlessly as their control. Systems failed, but the victory came at a cost. The cannon's discharge had revealed the facility's location to every remaining enemy ship. Marcus watched the tactical display with growing alarm as dozens of Devourer craft turned toward their position, weapons charging for a coordinated strike that would reduce the mountain to radioactive dust. That was when the true miracle happened. As the Devourer ships dove toward the facility, they found their path blocked by a wall of defending vessels. Human fighters that should have been retreating instead formed defensive screens. Cathara ships that could have escaped to safety positioned themselves as shields. Alien vessels from across the galaxy chose to stand and fight rather than preserve themselves. Nyx's influence had done more than coordinate the battle. The child had shared the emotions of every being in the Allied fleet, creating bonds of understanding that transcended species barriers. Each pilot fought not just for their own survival, but for the future of all life in the galaxy. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. Ships fell on both sides, heroes whose names would never be known, making sacrifices that allowed others to continue fighting. But slowly, steadily, the tide began to turn. Without their harvester ships and coordination networks, the Devourers found themselves facing an enemy that adapted faster than their programming could compensate for. As the last Devourer's ship was destroyed, a strange quiet settled over the battlefield. In the command center, Marcus, Zephora, and Nyx stood together, hardly believing what they had accomplished. Three beings who had met by chance in a frozen cave had somehow sparked a rebellion that spanned the galaxy. But even as they celebrated their victory, new signals began appearing on the long-range sensors. More ships approaching Earth, but these were different. Refugee fleets from worlds thought dead. Survivors who had been hiding in the outer darkness, waiting for someone to prove that the Devourers could be defeated. Word of Earth's victory was spreading faster than light could carry it, transmitted through quantum communication networks and psychic connections like Nyx's. Across the galaxy, other surviving worlds were rising up against their Devourer occupiers. The rebellion that had begun with one human's decision to help two strangers had become a wildfire of hope that no force could extinguish. In the months that followed, Earth became the center of a new alliance unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Species that had never met worked together to rebuild what had been lost and create something better than what had existed before. The facility that housed the resonance cannon became the seat of a government dedicated to ensuring that no world would ever again face extinction alone. Marcus found himself serving as Earth's representative to the Galactic Alliance, a role he had never sought but accepted with the same determination that had led him to help to dying strangers in a cave. Zephora became the chief coordinator of refugee resettlement, using their natural empathy to help displaced beings find new homes and purposes. And Nyx, whose abilities continued to grow and evolve, became something entirely new in galactic history. A living bridge between minds that allowed true understanding between species. Years later, When historians would ask how such an unlikely alliance had been formed, the answer would always be the same. It began with hope found in the darkest moment, with trust given when there was every reason to withhold it. With three beings who chose to see potential rather than just danger in each other, the galaxy had been reborn. Not through conquest or dominion, but through the simple recognition that life, in all its myriad forms, was worth preserving and celebrating. And at the heart of it all was the memory of a human who had chosen compassion over fear in a frozen cave, and two aliens who had chosen to trust despite every reason not to. Hope, once kindled, had indeed spread like wildfire across the stars.